A very good evening to everybody and welcome to the second of our two Overview and Scrutiny Board meetings for Bournemouth and Christchurch and Poole Council on Monday the 15th of June 2020. This is the second of the meetings today, which was due to begin at 6 p.m. and I apologise for the late start. It was definitively not around the lack of timekeeping prowess of the chairman and everything to do with the very important subjects that we were considering in the previous meeting. So I will move swiftly on to the main agenda. As per the first meeting, we are continuing with the virtual regulations. So this is a virtual meeting. All of the participants are joining virtually via Skype, and it will be live streamed via YouTube and other appropriate channels. So welcome to all members of the board, cabinet members, other participants, as well as members of the press and public that are joining us either live or after the event. I will read out some housekeeping notices about how the way that this meeting will be conducted. So please note that this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure that the meeting is managed effectively, please could everybody present follow the ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by myself as chairman. State your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name, as some people may need to dial into the meeting and therefore will not have the benefit of visual. Mute your microphone when you are not talking. If you would like to speak, please type RTS, request to speak, in the instant messaging conversation panel on the left-hand side of your screen and click the arrow button to send. Please note that this panel is visible to other parties on the meeting. If you are able to, it may be helpful to indicate the particular issue you wish to speak on in order to try and maintain the flow of the meeting. If there are any recommendations that require a formal vote, and then I will carry these out as chairman, asking for a response for, against or abstain from each councillor of the board. The regulations governing virtual meetings require all participants to hear and be heard throughout. When voting, I will therefore ask participants to do so in the acknowledgement that they have heard the debate and been engaged in the meeting throughout in accordance with those regulations. If you do not feel that this has been the case throughout the meeting, please alert me via the chat window and therefore abstain from voting. And finally, should my connection as chairman be lost throughout the meeting, the vice chairman will take over and a short adjournment will be agreed until my connection can be resumed. Viewers of the live feed at that point may see a holding screen throughout any adjournment. And finally, please could I ask as always that any background noise is kept to a minimum as far as possible and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you very much. I will move into item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies, and I will ask Claire if there are any apologies for this meeting. Thank you, Claire.
We have no apologies for this meeting, Chairman, and therefore item 2 we have no substitute members.
Thank you very much. I'll then move on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any local interests pertaining to any items on the agenda? I have Councillor Mike Brooke wishing to indicate. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, fine. Thank you, Chair. As council member on the board of BDC, it's agenda item 9 that I'm involved in, or could be. It's local interest.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooke. Do any further board members have any disclosable interests which they wish to alert us to? I'm seeing no further. There will be a further opportunity at the individual items if anybody discovers any further interests during the course of the meeting. I'll therefore move to item 4, which is public issues. Could I ask if there are any public issues? Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, I couldn't get my mute off. That we have no public questions, deputations, or petitions, statements or petitions for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In which case, I'll move straight on to item 5, which is the chairman's update. I gave most of the updates that were particularly relevant, including the change in membership of the first meeting earlier on today. So aside from the fact that I hope that this meeting is considerably quicker than the last meeting, that's probably the extent of my chairman's updates at this point. So in the spirit of that, I will move straight on to item 6, which is the scrutiny of children's services related cabinet reports. Colleagues, we have an item which is coming onto the cabinet a week Wednesday around converting Bournemouth Learning Centre into a school. So I will call on Councillor Sandra Moore, who's a portfolio holder for children's services, children's and families, to give us a very brief outline of that paper, which we have all read, and then I'll open it up to questions from the board. Thank you very much for joining us, Councillor Moore. Thank you. Pass to you.
Thank you, Chair. We have here a proposal to convert the BLC into a special school to be run as a satellite to a local external provider. The name of the external provider cannot be named in public at this stage, but this project is estimated to cost around 500,000, so the decision must go to Cabinet for approval, and funding will be allocated from the existing Basic Needs Grant from the DFE. The number of children and young people assessed as requiring specialist provision in BCP has increased recently. Although local provision to meet these needs is of high quality, there is unfortunately not sufficient places to meet the additional demand. Independent and non-maintained special schools have filled the gap, which has in turn put pressure on the high needs block funding and the school transport budget. So a range of proposals has been developed to increase capacity, create new provision to meet the needs of our children, and ensure that provision is available closer to their homes. Proposed projects were considered and agreed by Cabinet on both the 22nd of April and the 27th of May, but this project is in addition to those previously agreed. The BLC was originally built as a school, but it was closed in 2000. Its current use is as an adult training facility with office space. It's also located next to other schools, including a special school and a local park. The site is already classed as D1, and as there will not be a need for significant external building work, it should not need to go through the planning process. It's been advised that a 6-week formal consultation will be needed, and that will be in the manner prescribed and required by the DFE. If the proposal is agreed, the BLC will close in its existing form by the end of December 2020. This would enable works to commence as early as early in January as possible, with a view to opening by September 2021. Currently, the BLC accommodates just under 200 members of staff, the majority being BCP officers, but also colleagues from partner organisations who lease space in the building. The BCP teams include the Children's Social Care Assessment Team, Youth Offending Service and School Improvement Services. Partners include the School Nursing Service and the Action for Children team. The relocation of these staff was anticipated as part of the Corporate Transformation Programme. Now, this proposal has simply accelerated this process. Many of the BCP teams will be relocated into community-based provision. Children's centres, for example, in line with the review of early help services. Others will be moved into existing council accommodation in line with corporate transformation. The council will also work with partners to identify suitable alternative space that could be leased to them in existing council buildings. Now, staff have been consulted and the council's HR service will need to support the staff during relocation. I've also met on 2 occasions with ward and other councillors. The questions and issues raised at those meetings will be included in the public consultation. And from a local perspective, traffic and parking are very much a problem in this area because of all the schools. However, this proposal should actually improve the situation because less staff will use the site and children will arrive in minibuses. However, there will of course be pinch points, and these will be addressed through working with the provider. For example, they might consider different school opening and closing times. I don't know if Neil Goddard's got anything to add to that. Otherwise, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I can bring Mr. Goddard in if there are any extra questions that you can't field. Colleagues, I'll open this up to questions for the Cabinet member. I will, however, remind colleagues that anything that is referred to in Appendix A is confidential, and if you do wish to discuss any of the contents of Appendix A, we would need to go into confidential session. So where possible, if we could avoid that, I think that would be better in the spirit of openness and transparency. So I'll open open it up to board members for any questions regarding this item. If you wish to speak, please do indicate in the message bar. Thank you very much. I've got, in fact, very good point. We do have the chairman of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee with us here today. So I'll bring in Councillor Richard Burton first, if I may. Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I have got a couple of questions, a couple of points, but to be honest, I'm quite happy to give way to Councillor Nicola Green, because I'm sure she's had quite a history on this. She's going to be quite informed and insightful on this scrutiny. So I'm quite happy for Nicola Green to go first, and I'll follow up later, if that's okay with you.
Okay, in which case I'll pass to Councillor Nicola Green. Councillor Green. Sorry, we can't hear you, Councillor Green.
Can you now?
Can now. There you are. Welcome.
Apologies for my late start, and thank you to Councillor Burton for his generous words. I try to be both insightful and informed, but also brief. Always happy to see an investment in our school estate. I think Councillor Moore and I have both got formed for that. I won't go into the consultation, which I think we all recognise had a bit of a rocky start, and we were in danger of clutching defeat from the jaws of victory. But I am very grateful to the portfolio holder, and I know that the ward members are as well, for the recent assurances we've had about the public consultation which will go on. I just really wanted to refer to one point that was raised in those discussions, and the reason I do so is because it may not come up elsewhere. I'm very conscious, Chair, of your note about not referring to anything in the confidential part of this report, but this is a generic point about our local academy chains. We have some excellent real go-getters and doers in our academy chains. They've really, across the whole area for a number of years, been providing some really excellent support to schools where they needed them, and indeed to opening new provision. And I just issue the note of caution that we need to be conscious that it puts a great strain on the academies. They're very able, very capable, but that capacity is not inexhaustible. And it's just something that members need to bear in mind for the future. I will also, if I may, risk a ticking off from Councillor Brooke in making what may be considered a political point, but in our previous meeting, Councillor Trent said that he wasn't really much clearer about why we created BCP. And while it's not for me to do the Cabinet member's job, I would say this is exactly why we created BCP. It's to give some really excellent provision to the young people of our conurbation without the false barriers that existed before. And if this goes ahead, and it goes ahead in the right way, it will be a fantastic resource to the young people. And we couldn't have done that while we were two smaller unitary authorities. So I wish the project well. I also wish the consultation to be successful and meaningful for the local community. But frankly, Chairman, this is the BCP dividend.
Thank you very much. Councillor Burton, you wish to raise any further points?
Yeah, it's just it's not so much a question as I'm just curious. The number of SEND pupils have been increasing, it says in the document. I just wondered, do we have any idea about why that would be within the local area?
Councillor Moore.
Yeah, thank you. Well, obviously the legislation did change in 2014 when EHCP plans were created, and as a result, it sort of asked parents to want an EHCP plan before, because they thought that was the best way forward. And I think that has increased everything. It's certainly changed things, changed the entire dynamics. I don't know if Neil wants to add to anything there.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. If it's okay, Chair, I'll just say a few words on that. It's worth noting as well, of course, that members will be aware of a significant increase in pupil numbers that both previous authorities, or both Bournemouth and Poole, managed recently. Those pupil numbers are now moving into secondary, which is when we get the vast majority of our EHCP plans requested and approved. And so there is a demographic issue. There is a diagnosis issue with more conditions being diagnosed successfully and being treated successfully. And as Councillor Moore says, there is the change in regulation. So I think it's a number of things coming together that have created that, and it is a national picture. We're not a huge outlier in terms of this. The numbers of EHCPs are increasing nationally, and it is a pressure on the budget. So that's I think we're at.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Councillor Burton, any further questions?
Well, no, other than that, I find it quite an exciting project. I know people I've spoken to are also quite excited. Some of the young people I've spoken to love the idea of not having to travel so far to get the requirements that they, because of course young people having to travel distances to go to special schools, it's quite a strain on them. Coupled with that, it looks like there's going to be quite considerable savings. So I must admit I'm very much in support of this.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to having a further question from Councillor Mike Brooke. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Councillor Green can be assured I'm not going to criticise her on this occasion because she well knows that my interests through education are that the children receive the best they possibly can, and this is a tremendously exciting opportunity to address some of the issues that we've got right across the new council in terms of special needs and also the financial side through the high needs block. It seems to me that it is a win-win situation here, not only for the benefit of the children, but it also through the savings addresses the high needs block to some extent and the problems that exist there, and also it looks as if it could have some positive impacts on the environment and certainly the issues around long distance travel. So I don't see any issue here at all at this particular point, and I hope it goes well, and it will be one of many satellites of different types that are scheduled over the next 12 months to 24 months.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooke. I don't have any other members wishing to indicate with any further questions. Anything further you wish to add, Councillor Moore?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's absolutely right. This is a really good news story. It's the best one we've had today, I think.
Thank you very much. In which case, if I have no further questions or comments from members of the board, we've all seen the papers and the recommendations that will be going to Cabinet, and it looks like there's satisfaction there. So thank you very much to Mr. Goddard and to Councillor Moore for joining us. That will move us on to item 7 of our agenda in this second meeting, which is the scrutiny of tourism, leisure and communities related Cabinet reports, of which we have 2. So I will introduce Councillor Allison to take us to the first one, which is the regeneration of the existing restaurant and beach office facilities into a new destination leisure offer at Bistro on the Beach. And again, we've read the papers, so a brief introduction, please, Councillor Allison. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As you say, this is for the redevelopment of the Bistro on the Beach site in Southbourne. The current building is reaching the end of its life and is due to reach the end of its life in 2023. And so we brought forward this scheme to replace it with something much more aspirational. It includes a fully accessible public lift, so there's access from the East Cliff down onto the seafront. It expands the restaurant below. It has additional public toilets, and it also has an expanded lodger scheme, which includes a spa treatment facility room. There's quite a lot of detail in the report, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allison. I've had a message from Councillor Bartlett saying that as he sits on the planning board, he won't be taking part in this debate. Do I have any other colleagues wishing to ask any questions or make any comments about this application? I'm looking at the while I wait. I do have a few, and really it's the it's less about the scheme itself and just more about the these cabinet papers. We've had this a number of times, and it's constructive criticism rather than necessarily being a die in the ditch. But under paragraph 1.2, it talks about the different options that were considered, and it seems to me that the options that seem to be considered in the paper are option A, which is obviously do what the paper is suggesting. Option 2, to do nothing and essentially essentially to let the asset remain empty and do nothing with it, and option 3 to knock it down and replace it with just a temporary kiosk, all of which are fine themselves. But of course there are other options as well, and option 4 could well be for the development to carry on in its current function, albeit refurbished. So I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that that's the right thing to do, but I'd urge in future that when we are presenting a range of options for consideration, that the realistic options are the ones which are put forward. I have Councillor Anderson wishing to speak. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. As no one else was going to speak, I would just like to say that I think this is a good scheme. I would congratulate the officers under Chris Saunders. I think that I know most of his officers in that team, and I think they've done an excellent job in this, and I would like to congratulate them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Rigby.
Yeah, I was just going to say something very similar, actually. I really like this scheme. I think it's about time that space was put back into use and we brought it into what it can do. I really like the designs which have been put forward, and I look forward to seeing it making a start and us having that available to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rigby. Any further questions on this scheme or this paper indeed? I have one more question. It's a minor one, but it's actually due to a question that I've been asked via email from one of the people that have the beach huts that are currently on the site that are due for essentially demolition and not replacing. And I wonder whether the cabinet member can give me any indication on what the proposal is for those that will have their contracts terminated, the current people with their beach huts there.
Yeah. So we're currently working to try and rehouse them. The people who have got beach huts on that site that are due to demolish. They're all
Sorry, Councillor Allison, I don't think we quite heard.
Hires, so they're
Sorry.
And it'll be.
Councillor Allison, can you hear us?
Sorry,
We're struggling to hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you now. I wonder if you want to just repeat that. Apologies.
So yeah, so to my knowledge, all of the people who have got beach huts that are currently due to be demolished as part of this project are all on annual lets. So what we will do is we'll work with the individual tenants to try and find them an alternative beach hut somewhere else along the seafront.
Okay, I think we got the gist of that. Apologies, it seemed to have a bad line on your side. Colleagues, do I have any further comments or questions regarding the bistro on the beach redevelopment? I have Councillor Matt Green. Sorry, Councillor Nicola Green. Councillor Nicola Green? Are we there?
Sorry, I had a problem on my machine, so I just come downstairs. Yeah, very, very quickly. Table 2, I think there's a mistake right down at the bottom of week 16 to 19. Page 78.
So could you clarify, Councillor Green?
Page 78, I think it is, at the bottom of table 2, it suggests that the saving for years, or the money coming in for years 16 to 19 is 8 million plus.
Okay.
I think the 8 should not be there.
Yeah, Councillor Allison, you wish to either confirm that that's a mistake or unleash some master plan for an extra £8 million that year?
Thank you very much. No, that's definitely a mistake. I'll get that corrected.
All right, thank you.
Excellent. Colleagues, I'm not seeing any further indications from board members that they wish to add anything further to this one. As this is a full redevelopment scheme, this is going to Cabinet and full council because it's being funded via prudential borrowing. So this will go both to council, sorry, to Cabinet and to council as well. Any further or final comments? In which case, no. I will say thank you very much for introducing that one, Councillor Allison, and I'll move on to the next of your two items, which is the approval of the Town Investment Plan for Boscombe to MHCLG, the Towns Fund. Thank you very much, Councillor Allison.
Thank you very much. Yes, so this report is to recommend that we approve the approach to sent off to government. This is part of quite a lot that's been going on in Boscombe for quite a long time, and it is the biggest iteration that we've had. So this is to bid for up to £25 million from the Towns Fund Board. We received a grant of £173,000 to form our application. Are in the process of doing that. We've had several meetings of town due to have the third meeting about next week. It's a hugely exciting scheme that can have a massive impact on a lot of people in Boscombe. As people on the call will be aware,
Councillor Allison, I'm sorry to do this
BCP
again, but it is still need to. It's still a particularly bad line. If I could make a quick suggestion to turn your video on and then off again, it might well refresh the stream, and we'll see if that works. Because we had an issue in the previous meeting whereby it was your video that was causing the problem.
Yeah,
Try
so
that
I left
now.
the video off for the whole of this, but it doesn't seem to have helped. Apologies.
That seems to be better. We seem to. We'll try it one more time. So apologies. We got every we lost one in every 5 words of that. If you wish to start again.
Not a problem. So this is our proposal for submitting our grants to government. So we've applied for up to £25 million from the government's Towns Fund Board scheme. This is going to have quite a huge impact on the people in Boscombe. As people will know, Boscombe is the area in BCP which has got the highest level of indices of multiple deprivation, and this can have a massive impact on a lot of different aspects of their lives. So in addition to regeneration and planning, there's quite a lot of work that we're going to be looking at in terms of jobs and skills and employability, and also connectivity in terms of transport routes, and also making sure that people, have improved digital connectivity. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions on it.
Thank you. We heard that all perfectly. So apologies to everyone watching, and thank you for bearing with us, and thank you for repeating yourself, Councillor Allison.
No problem.
I will move to colleagues on the board to see if there are any questions or comments around this scheme. If anybody has any, if they can indicate. Obviously, I think it's always good news when we're in line to get money from government. So I think broadly speaking, certainly from my side, it seems to be certainly something that we want to put all of our efforts behind. And it's good to see some big names on our strategic board as well. I'm clearly filling for time whilst I wait to see if there's any other colleagues that wish to say anything on this item. I'm not having any other indications.
I'm hoping that's a good thing.
Well, Councillor Farquhar can always be relied on to say something, can't we, Councillor Farquhar? So, Councillor Farquhar.
Yes, no, I'd just like to say that as Boscombe East councillor and Folkestone, of course, is that this is very much welcomed, very much overdue, and I congratulate the portfolio holder on the fact that this will be happening in his own ward, and I'm looking forward to a very successful delivery.
Thank you very much. I would always urge holding off the full congratulations until we win the bid and we get the money in the bank. But of course, when we're in the running, it's always good news, and I think it's something we can all get behind. Colleagues, I don't see any further indications of people that wish to raise any questions or comments on this, so I take that as support for the item. In which case, thank you very much to Councillor Allison for those 2 items, and we will move swiftly on to agenda item 8, which is the scrutiny of the housing-related cabinet reports. We have 2 items for consideration from Councillor Wilson today. Both affordable housing developments, one at Templeman House and one at Moorside Road. Once again, I have Councillor Bartlett indicating that he will not take part in the Templeman House debate as he's on the planning committee. As again, we've all read the papers and they seem to be pretty straightforward. I think I'll suggest that Councillor Wilson, if you want to take both the papers together, and then we can ask questions on those as appropriate. So a quick a 2-minute summary of both papers would be probably adequate. Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Okay, cheers. Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Thank you, Chair. So the first development is Templeman House. It's unfortunate that Councillor Bartlett won't be in this debate, because it's a bit of a celebration in terms of bringing forward the first social rented site in a long time in the Bournemouth neighbourhood, and I think this is something that we've been wanting to progress for quite a while. It's 27 apartments, both 1 and 2 bedrooms, and they're going to be built to pacifist standards. The site was previously a care home that had 41 bedrooms, but adult social care no longer required the site, and we took it on for housing. So it's quite an exciting prospect to bring through social rented development. The second of our 2 developments we have today is Moorside, which is a 14 4-bedroom development for homes, and they are much needed homes. We're always looking for 4 bedrooms for families, and they're affordable rent, which is still going to be capped at local housing allowance rates. So again, more affordable stock that we can use in terms of getting people off of our housing register, which is really important. And once again, although they're not going to be built to pacifist standards, they are going to have a lot of strong environmental features, such as PV and different insulations and triple glazing. So again, another high quality scheme coming through. So I tried to keep that brief and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. I'll open it up to comments from colleagues on the board. Councillor Earl, Millie Earl.
Thank you very much, Chair. So thank you, Councillor Wilson. I think this looks like a really exciting scheme, and I'm so pleased to see the Council embracing passive house standards and deliver really good quality socially rented homes to meet that housing need. But I'm very aware that with planning permission approved for like the Cynthia House site, this is another care home that will be turned into housing. I just wanted to ask if the option to deliver a purpose-built care home on the site was considered, as we obviously need to balance the need for homes with the need for care home places, both of which are in very high demand. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, you wish to come back on that?
So I believe a purpose-built care home was considered by estates, but they didn't have the requirement to have one in the area. I think South Care were actually operating at around 50% void, so half of their spaces weren't being used, sort of thing. And we do have other sites nearby which are available potentially if we did want to take up that option, and in zones where it's designated they can't have housing, such as Draper Road. So yeah, it was considered and we did think it through, but it wasn't required. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lawrence Fear.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a couple of points to raise on the Moorside development. The paper actually says on the front page the ward's name of Kinston South. It's obviously that was under Bournemouth Council. It was so hopefully that'll be changed just to Kinston now. It's good to see this development happening. We had the debate back in planning and Bournemouth Council, and it was approved. It was put forward by Bournemouth Council, where they wanted to have more social housing. There was social housing built on year on year by the Conservatives. So it's really good that this is continuing under BCP following on from the work that was already set out by one of the legacy councils, namely Bournemouth, on that. And even though there was some issues at the time from residents, it was a really well strung out debate with that application, and hopefully people will see the benefits of this. So I do warmly welcome it now, and hopefully we will see more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fear. Councillor Mike Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I just wanted to check. As I was having a bit of problem with the machine, I think it's sorted out now. But did I hear Councillor Wilson suggest that this was the first socially rented housing scheme that was in Bournemouth for some time? I just wonder whether he was around with the 50 properties for Tuck Lane and all those that took place in Southbourne and Boscombe. I think Duck Lane, was it not late 2018, 2019? I think Councillor Wilson was a councillor there. Maybe not. Maybe he hadn't looked at what had happened the year before that.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Wilson?
I wasn't a councillor back then. I hadn't looked around that.
Thanks for the clarification then, Councillor Green. Councillor Wilson?
No, that's fine. No.
Councillor Bartlett?
Yeah, I just to pick up on that, I think what we're saying is that Moorside Road is affordable housing. It's not per se social housing rents, and that's the difference. I think Duck Lane was essentially an affordable housing type development as opposed to affordable housing with social rents, and I think that's really the difference. But anyway, the question I've got is the build costs for Moorside Road are really very, very high, given they're semi-detached, etc. I just wonder why they seem to be so high, and I just wondered on that basis, have we attracted any HCA grant for the Moorside Road development, and if not, why not?
Councillor Wilson.
I think one of the reasons the construction costs are quite high are to do with external factors such as moving slow worms and the fact that it's built on a slope. But I do have, I believe, housing development manager John Thornton on the line if he would like to clarify any other further points around that, especially the HCA grant.
Mr. Thornton, are you with us?
I am indeed. Apologies. Jonathan Thornton, Housing Development Manager. High build cost. We're currently working off employers' agents' build cost, so they will have 5% contingency plus our own 5% contingency. So we're working on quite a strong 10% contingency for this scheme, and they've yet to go out to tender. So we've put in quite a strong budget, hoping that we'll then come well below that. That covers the build cost. As far as Homes England funding is concerned, at the moment our focus is to use right to buy receipts, which we can't mix with Homes England funding, and the level of funding that we will intend to use will actually be higher with right to buy receipts, which will be lost to back to government rather than basically bidding for new money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thornton, for that clarification. Councillor Bart, you wish to come back, or are you happy with that?
No, absolutely fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Board members, do I have any further questions or comments regarding either of these two papers for Cabinet, Templeman House and Moorside Road? Not seeing any at this stage. In which case, I will finish that item of the scrutiny of housing-related cabinet reports. Thank you very much to Councillor Wilson for joining us, and to Jonathan Thornton as well. So we'll move on now to item 9, which is the scrutiny of the regeneration-related cabinet reports. We have one item here, which is the Bournemouth Town Centre Vision Durley Road site, approval of the site lease value and additional council finance. And I will pass over to Councillor Mark Howell for the introduction. Councillor Howell, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Obviously, in the last overview and scrutiny board session, this was actually this scheme was actually addressed quite substantially in the context of the report, the business plan for BDC. So I don't intend to take a lot of your time. I'd rather just focus on trying to answer your questions. But essentially, this report is a recommendation to provide £950,000 of additional council finance to the scheme, which is the equity element that we will be putting in as a loan. It is to approve the grant of a lease. And there will be the site lease value will be a minimum of £250,000. Which is a bit of a departure from the way that things have been done in the past. In the past, there hasn't been a minimum amount set for the amounts that the council receive in terms of site lease value, but it has been negotiated this way this time. And there are various functional elements that need to be approved, like the option execute dates. We need to set aside £48,000 per annum plus interest as a reserve provision in the MTFP. We need to authorise the various officers, corporate property officer and section 151 officer, to carry out their work and account for the loss of the car parking income. But I'd point out here in point H, we say that the MTFP is being adjusted for the net loss of £42,800 per annum, but I understand that doesn't account for any uplift which in income in other car parks in the immediate area, and we would certainly expect such an uplift because the parking is inevitably going to be displaced, and there's an adjustment to the capital programme, as you see there. This is not a big scheme, about 40 residences, but it is an attractive one in my view. It's something that will add to the area, and it will generate or should generate a significant profit, which can be reinvested into other schemes, as we talked about last time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howell. I'll remind colleagues that all of the appendices for this item are confidential, so if we could limit our discussion to the public elements of the report, certainly at first, and if we do feel that we wish to delve further into those confidential items, we will have to go into private session. I'll start the questioning, if I may. Councillor Howell, you're right, we did talk about this in some detail under the item for the BDC business plan at the last cabinet meeting. And I recall at that point that you saying just because it was in the BDC business plan didn't mean that it would go ahead, or indeed that you're in favour of it, because it would be coming to a further cabinet if you wanted to take it ahead. So can I assume that as cabinet member, the fact that it is being presented here as a paper means that you are satisfied that you wish to proceed with the scheme?
Yes, I am satisfied.
Super. Thank you very much indeed. Right, so I will go to other colleagues that wish to speak on this item. We were having some questions in the sidebar about the planning situation on this. Just for those members that haven't read the papers fully, this did go to planning permission. It got refused at planning permission. It then went to appeal. It was won at appeal. So any members that do sit on the planning board, there should be no conflicts of interest at this stage, because it has already been through the planning and appeal process as it stands. Councillor Mike Green, you've indicated. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I don't think I need to say again about the reasons why I believe that the council should not go through with this. Those were well rehearsed last time. They have been rehearsed at council and were indeed at planning, mostly around the decision to go ahead with something which is not re-providing parking in an area which I believe does require that, and particularly at this first day when we have seen shops in the town centre reopening, and they will need to recover from all the difficulties that they have had to be pulling away parking for town centre shoppers, I think is ridiculous. But clearly the administration has made a decision that it would still like to do that, and I don't think that we necessarily need to be going over that again. But I would like to ask about the well, actually, if I can do it in two parts, Chairman, maybe if I can just get some answers first of all on the recommendation C. The option with BDC is around for a certain period of time to allow the those sites to be put within the BDC remit for development, and this suggests that we need to agree a change to the option execute date to allow this development to take place. I would like to come back once I've heard the answer to this, please. But maybe Councillor Howells could explain why that needs to be done and what would be the situation if the council decided that it would not extend that option.
Councillor Howell.
Yes, I understand that the option dates. I mean, we've had another situation. I think it was with Winter Gardens where we did extend the option execution date, and it's essentially when you get a complicated or delayed scheme, then it's just practically sensible for the parties to want to extend that date. But I would, we do have BDC representatives on the call who would probably be better able to answer that than me or the officer. Sarah,
if I might suggest, it would probably be one for an officer to handle. I think Councillor Green's question was what would happen from the council side if that option agreement wasn't extended, which is probably a council question. So
yeah,
if you can't specifically answer, we perhaps get an officer to clarify that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Sarah's on the line, but I'd just like to say, you know, I think if what you're driving at is there a potential that we could back out of the scheme at that point, then I don't see that as relevant, because we want to do the scheme. I mean, I think it is a good scheme. We're not looking to back away from it.
Yeah, but Councillor Howell, just because you think it's relevant doesn't mean that there isn't an answer to the question, because obviously there are options. I wonder whether either Bill Cotton
shall I come in, Councillor Broadhead? It's Bill Cotton here. Hi there.
Hi, Bill. Hi.
I'll just come in just to answer Councillor Green's point. Yes. The main point of changing or having is basically adding some flexibility to the execute date, so that we're not hamstrung by any issues we find around starting the construction or whatever. So we've actually just got a bit more flexibility in terms of delivering the site. If we didn't approve it or didn't approve the extension of the date, it just means that things are slightly more constrained in terms of having to start on site. It doesn't stop the project, but it just means it's more it's just flexible, less flexible in its delivery.
Thank you, Mr. Cotton. Councillor Green, you wish to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I mean, my point on this, and I said I've accepted that this administration is determined to press ahead with this scheme despite the issues. But my reason for asking was because I have some doubt whether the path that is proposed here of BDC developing the scheme in accordance with this and with the site value in what is therefore the receipt to the council being as described in the paper, I have some considerable concerns about that, and I will, if I can just outline those, but I will stick, I believe, to everything that's only in the public papers. If it needs to stray outside that, I'd be grateful for your guidance. Now, the way that I've looked at this, paragraph 33 points out that there's a section 106 payment that will be required by the developer at 365,000. Paragraph 34 talks about the land value of 250,000, and we then know from further paragraphs that there will be hopefully a further payment to the council of 50% of the development profit. The predicted development profit is described in the confidential papers, so I won't go into that, but paragraph 28 points out that the gross development value is expected to be about 12 million. Within all of the agreements and all of the sites that we've developed through BDC, we've established that the developer profit should be between 12 and 16% of the gross development value. And using that, it suggests that there will be a development profit of between just over 1.4 million and just over 1.9 million, for which the council would expect to receive half of that on top of the 250,000. And Councillor Howell suggested that it hadn't in the past been that we would have a minimum value and be able to go up from that. That's not the case, actually. It's been that for all the sites. But what that means is that we would have an expected value coming to the council through the two items, the site value that's agreed and the 50% of the development profit, of somewhere between £1 and £1.2 million. Now, when we look at the fact that we are talking about 44 flats, a development of 3,900 square metres, taking into account that there is that section 106 amount payable, that there is a lift to put in, that there is a cycle store, but no underground parking, I believe very strongly that if a private sector developer were asked to come in and to bid for this site, or to put in an offer for the site, to do exactly what Councillor Howells has said the council wants to do, which is to execute exactly this, the planning permission that has been granted, I believe it very likely that we would get bids considerably in excess of that £1.25 million top, which is what is expected at the moment for the council. It is very clear, I think it's paragraph, I've made a note, can't remember which paragraph, I think it might be 43, that we are required by law to extract best value for the council taxpayer, and I believe that the proposal before Cabinet will not do that. So I would ask, and I will put a recommendation forward later in the debate if that's what is required, that Cabinet do not go ahead with this, but instead look to the open market for offers to develop the site exactly in line with this planning permission, because I believe that that will show a greater return to the council than is proposed through this BDC route. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Green, for that extensive homework as well. Councillor Bartlett, do you wish to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Green has taken the words right out of my mouth there in terms of the financial balance here. And I don't know what the market value of that site would be, but I think it would be likely that if the council were to do what Councillor Green suggested, it would be a more favourable position for the council. But that's not the only issue I have with this development. And as a member of the planning board, I was a member where we actually, despite this site being on the BDC site list, we decided, in view of the representations we received, to unanimously turn the planning consent down. And of course, we know the history. It went to appeal, and the appeal inspector granted the scheme effectively. But I have to say that I don't agree necessarily. I have to, obviously I have to accept it. I don't agree necessarily with the appeals inspector's findings. But what I think here is the decision to go ahead with this is actually bad for the multitude of small businesses and the hotels in particular in the area. It's bad for those patients that use the NHS facilities in the area, and it's bad for the parents that drop their children at the local school there. And let's not forget that the town centre vision, there was a link between the West Hill Road car park, which was supposed to be increased to 200 places in order to accommodate a development on the Durley Road site. A thing that the appeals inspector seems to just ignore. Well, the whole premise of this overall parking policy across the town centre was to replace those which you were losing on the sites that you were developing. And here we have a site that is going ahead, but with no replacement parking. The intention was always to put additional parking in West Hill Road. So I'd like to ask portfolio holder here when he intends to instigate a programme to develop the additional parking spaces in West Hill Road. So there are a number of issues that I've got with this. One is the financial benefit for the council, and the two is just plainly a bad decision for the reasons that I've said. So I'd be very grateful to hear the views on the West Hill car park. Thank you.
Councillor Howe, you wish to come back on the parking? Sorry, Councillor Howe, you're on mute.
Sorry, I've got multiple screens open. Yeah, I mean, firstly, on the parking, which both Councillor Green and Councillor Bartlett raised, we have an oversupply of parking currently in Bournemouth, which is widely acknowledged. We only fill up all the car parks on, I think, a couple of days a year. Now, there's always been a plan for how parking would be rearranged, and the permit holders that have permits for Durley Road would be moved to West Hill, and those that have permits for West Hill would be moved to the Avenue car park. The Avenue car park is an enormous car park, over 900 spaces. There is sufficient space in both car parks. That's ignoring the BIC, which is of course another close by car park. Plus the fact that ultimately you have the Winter Gardens car park back on stream. There are lots of car parks in this part of town, and Councillor Green was saying, actually, you know, this is going to harm the town centre, but all those car parks are closer to the town centre than Durley Road car park. So I don't think that is a valid point. People, there's certain councillors that, I think are, not recognising the massive shift that we're getting in terms of people moving away from the car. I mean, in Poole Town Centre already, a third of the households don't have a car. It may be, I mean, I just think there's a lack of recognition there of that important shift, which we should be encouraging. In terms of, it's been going on for some time, this, but I don't think I've received a single objection from a member of the public or any business in relation to the Durley, this scheme. Actually, in terms of improving the highway and particularly safety on it and around the school, there will be a Section 106 payment of £350,000, which is laid out in the report, which will make a significant difference. It's very positive from that respect, and obviously in terms of people, dropping their kids off at school, that's something that we need to move away from. We need to make our streets safer for children to travel to school on. In terms of the viability, I have to be a bit careful here, because I do question a bit Councillor Green's methods of questioning there, where he tried to create an artificial scenario that people in the public will assume is related to the confidential papers, and I think that puts me in a difficult position, because obviously in this forum I can't discuss the confidential papers. But to assume that a third party, a developer, can actually get much more profit out of the site. I know Councillor Green is, is a developer himself, but it is, there's a history of stalled sites across Bournemouth and Poole that aren't being delivered by the private sector. And indeed, BDC was created because that was the case in Bournemouth. And it is delivering building and development of a high quality. And at the end of the day, we get 50% of the profit. So our development partner, Morgan Sindall, does not have an interest in minimising its profit, and by maximising its profit, it also maximises the council's profit.
Thank you very much.
Possibly that's all I was going to say.
Thank you,
no, there's one thing actually wasn't about the planning committee as well, which Councillor Bartlett raised. Now, there is a distinction between the planning process and the council decision to go ahead with a project. So the planning inspector actually approved the project and turns over the council planning committee's decision, but the council did not have to go ahead. The last Bournemouth Borough Council did not have to go ahead with the scheme, or it didn't have to go. Indeed, it didn't have to submit the appeal. In just looking back at the history here, the Bournemouth Council Cabinet approved the business plan with the Durley Road scheme in 8 times, if I understand, and it approved the first application, and then its representative on the BDC board, Councillor Dawson Gibson, approved the appeal. So the appeal was
apologies,
submitted
Councillor
in
Howell.
December
I have a
18.
point of order that's being raised by Councillor Anderson. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to be correct the factual inaccuracies that Councillor Howell's just made. I did speak to then Councillor Dalton Gibson about this car park, and I did ask him about why the committee, sorry, the Bournemouth Development Corporation was going ahead with the appeal, and his comment to me was that the group of executive directors was not all Bournemouth councillors, it was split, and the decision was made not by the Bournemouth councillors but by the executive to go ahead. So I think it's factually incorrect to say that Bournemouth councillors tried to carried on with it, because Councillor Dalton Gibson, as he was then, definitely assured me that he tried to stop it.
Well, that cannot be the case, because it requires currently a unanimous vote of council representatives on the BDC board to approve something, and in fact we are about to amend that in the next cabinet papers, so we can offer a seat to a member of the opposition to increase transparency within the BDC setup. So yeah, the reality is that Councillor Dawson Gibson, as I'm informed, did approve of and vote for the planning application in the board meeting.
Thank
I
you.
think we have
I've got a
BDC
few other,
representatives here who could probably just confirm that if you wanted to. I mean, it's a matter of BDC minutes, I guess.
While that's pondered, I'll bring in some other people that wish to speak on this item. I have Councillor Nicola Green as a ward councillor. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman.
There you are.
Sorry, not very dexterous. I just following on from Councillor Bartlett's point in his role on the planning board, and said that he'd, as with all the other planning board members, had read the comments of the local residents. I'm rather disappointed to find that Councillor Howell thinks that because they haven't written to him this time that they didn't care, perhaps. I'd just like to add, and apologies because I'm going to try and search for something, so I'm very sorry if I lose you. There appears to have been a bit of version difficulty in the report which is finally published. I would like to read to members of this board, and I would also like Cabinet to note, if they can please, that there was an additional sentence to the paragraph which appears in the report on the engagement of the ward councillors. Sorry, that is paragraph 19. The draft which Councillor Beasley and I had suggested, the first two sentences are the same. However, there is a final sentence which reads, the ward councillors share the concerns raised by local residents during the planning consultation process relating in particular to the loss of car parking provision. So whether or not that can actually be added to the Cabinet report, because that was the understanding of the ward councillors, I would be grateful. But the fact is that that is our view, and it is a slightly different nuance. And I take Councillor Howell's point that some use of cars have changed, and there's been it's tended to be in one direction recently, and actually I welcome much of that. We don't know what the post-COVID situation is going to be. But the point that I would make, and this applies as much to the residents of the Westcliff area of town, which is has certainly some challenges of our own, is just because people can't afford cars themselves, it does not mean that they are not impacted by parking and the difficulties that of overspill from those car parks. And I'd just like that to be borne in mind, rather than just a sweeping assumption that because you haven't got a car, you don't mind where you park it, because it really does make a difference to the lives of the residents in those abutting streets. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mike Green, you wish to come back?
I do. Thank you very much, Chairman. You know, Councillor Howell normally looks at things in great detail, so I was expecting the same in this case. But I'm afraid some of the things that were said there, I don't know where they're coming from. As Councillor Nicola Green has just said, if you want to look at what the residents nearby think of this, then take a look at the previous planning application and the scores of letters of objection on this. When it comes to car parking, and I said I do take a slightly different approach from Councillor Bartlett, although I absolutely agree with him on this. I also believe that the administration has made a decision to go ahead with this, and that is the right of an administration to do so. But to suggest that the demand for parking in the area has gone down just completely defies reality, and particularly if anyone goes to it. You can see and in fact they're referenced in the report, in the report to this one, the fact that there were some studies done between 2014 and 2017 of occupancy in Durley Road car park and in Westhill car park. If you go around now, even during lockdown at some of the stage, you will see that those car parks are full. There are too many cars in those car parks for the capacity of Westhill. As Councillor Bartlett pointed out, the idea was to double-deck it. There was not enough money apparently in the scheme to allow that, but that is what the principle was. When we're talking about, as Councillor Howells did, that Bournemouth Council didn't need to agree the appeal, Bournemouth Council did not agree the appeal. In fact, Bournemouth Council was very much against the appeal. I was Councillor Dalton Gibson, or previous Councillor Dalton Gibson's predecessor on BDC, and in going in, we were given a very clear instruction that when we act for BDC, we had to make sure that we were saying and acting and voting according to what is best for BDC, not what is best for Bournemouth Council, not what is best for Bournemouth residents, but for BDC as an entity. So the same as Bill Cotton, Councillor Dalton Gibson, I think it was Roger Ball at the time, were obliged to vote and to decide in accordance with what was best for that entity at BDC. And the entity at BDC had the opportunity to go to appeal and to get something which had been denied by planning board. So it's absolutely right that they acted in that way, which was their legal responsibility to do so. When it comes to what Councillor Howell was suggesting on the...
Councillor Green, could I ask you to move the debate forward slightly? Thank you.
Yes, I will do so. But
I wonder if I might address those points before he does.
What was, again, wrong with what Councillor Howell was suggesting on the profit side. Because although BDC wants to increase its development, its profit from the development, you've also got to remember that the project management side of it, the money for that goes to Morgan Sindall. The construction work goes to Morgan Sindall Construction. The money that will be made by the Morgan Sindall side of the equation comes only 50% from themselves and the other 50% from the Bournemouth Council taxpayer. So it is in Morgan Sindall's interest for the value to go down and the construction costs to go up. That is the reason that I intend to put forward a proposal on this, and I will argue and continue to argue that it is the council's legal responsibility to get best value for the council taxpayer, and if they make a decision which is clearly not that, because they haven't put it out to tender, then I believe that that will be an ultra vires decision.
Thank you, Councillor Green. If you do intend to put forward a proposed recommendation, if I could ask you perhaps to draft that and put that in the instant messaging window. Whilst we're doing that, I understand Councillor Howell wishes to come back. Councillor Howell.
Yeah, it is interesting that this line of argument that actually we're not maximising the value of the land is come out now. It wasn't mentioned at all a month ago when we went through this. And a whole different set of arguments were put forward by Councillor Green. The scheme is set up.
With respect, there, I do believe that you drew us to concentrate on the business plan at that point, and we'd have adequate opportunity to talk about the pros and cons of the Durley Road scheme at that point. So I think that's slightly unfair to Councillor Green. Not that I always agree with Councillor Green, as we know, but we are here to talk about this today. Thank you.
Yeah, but the mechanism is set up within the BDC agreement, and as I said, I think last time that I from the outside I was like a lot of people suspicious of the arrangement, partly because it was a closed arrangement, and we, as I said, we are addressing that by opening up representation to the opposition on the board. But as I've looked at it and how the structure works, it is set up to benefit both sides, and I don't see that Morgan Sindall can game the system particularly, and indeed in many developments, including the Winter Garden, it's not going to be the actual developer itself. So it is I just don't think that's a point in terms of this kind of game again that the previous members of the previous administration in Bournemouth seem to be playing to try and completely disown any approval of this scheme. The reality is that the appeal was submitted in December 18, and then in February 2019, the Bournemouth Cabinet approved the business plan with the Durley Road scheme in it. The reality is. Also, I mean, I'm a corporate lawyer. I know that the representatives of subsidiaries and joint ventures can look to their their sponsors, essentially, the companies that appoint them in to look after their interest as well as the interests of the actual joint venture company. It is just no. I don't think anybody's really going to believe that somehow there was a complete Chinese wall between the actions of the Conservative representative on BDC and the Conservative council. In terms of the car parking, I think it often looks like car parks are full because I admit that a lot of people prefer to park in surface car parks. But while those surface car parks are full, the multi-stories will have lots of spaces in them. It's just a reality of the very increasingly constrained urban environment that we live in. That car parks are going to have to be multi-stories, and if people want to drive into town, they're going to need to use them.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. Councillor Green has put the wording for his suggested proposal into the conversation, and I've had indication from Councillor Mellor that he wishes to second. Councillor Green, can I ask you to read it out for those that are not those that are joining us virtually, and then I have a few others that wish to partake in the debate. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As I have put an amendment, I adjusted what I've written in there. My recommendations: Cabinet do not agree recommendations A, B, C, E or G and amend recommendation D accordingly. In line with the legal requirement under section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972 to achieve best value for the council taxpayer, Cabinet offers a 150-year lease on the land for sale in the open market. Potential bidders must recognise they will be required to implement the planning permission already granted on the site, including payments in accordance with the Section 106 agreement in place. And I don't think I'll need to speak. I think I've spoken enough about my reason for proposing this. The one thing that I would just ask Councillor Howells, if he does come back in response to this, is what is he afraid of in going out to the market and seeing what other people would offer for it?
Thank you very much. I'll look on the opportunity to Councillor Howell to come back at the end of when other people have made their points. So I'll go to Councillor Mike Brooke first. Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. Just trying to bring the camera up. There we are. I can't support this motion. I think it's an attempt to break the contract, as it were, between the council and BDC.
Councillor Brooke, are you speaking as a councillor or as a board member of BDC on this item?
I'm speaking as a councillor,
okay,
which is my right at this particular point. The point I'm making is that if that relationship is broken and this scheme is aborted, I know that it's saying going out to tender, but it would be aborted in the first instance. What would the cost be to the council for making that abortion? It seems to me that there would be costs which would potentially be far greater, both financially and environmentally, than the potential benefits that Councillor Green is suggesting we would get by going out to tender.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. I'll take a few more questions. Councillor Bartlett and then Councillor Mellor. Councillor Bartlett.
No, my question went away. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, I didn't see that. Councillor Mellor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just listening to the debate here, I think it's entirely naive to say that Morgan Sindall and BCP's interests are absolutely aligned. For the point Councillor Green makes, and I disagree with Councillor. It's not a non-point at all. You know, there are build cost elements and profit elements. And also, we're talking about one of the items here is extending the time frame to do this, and what we heard from the officer was that let's just take the foot off the gas. It's effectively. So even if we didn't agree with the motion, why would we want to be extending the time frame? If we want this to be built, get on and build it. I think the key point here is the one Councillor Green has made repeatedly. We have an obligation to get the best value. Be brave enough to try and do it. I fully support the motion, and I'm very happy to second it.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I haven't seen any other board members that wish to comment on this. I'll bring Councillor Howell back in, who wanted to address a few of those points that have been raised. Councillor Howell.
Yes, in relation to this new idea of, let's just ask somebody else if they will develop the site for us. We can't do that because the sites are subject to an option agreement, which we agreed with Morgan Sindall, or I say we, which the Conservative, presumably administration in Bournemouth, agreed to. Now, if it hadn't, these things should have been envisaged when the Conservatives entered into this agreement. Actually, I mean, I say it's not an issue because I believe the agreement is solid. But the other point I'd like to make is I just think it's really irresponsible, an irresponsible approach to take from the opposition here, because it's really difficult to get regeneration and development going in this part of the world. We're a bit of a limb here. We're outside the southeast area where a lot of developers concentrate, and it needs a strong political message and consistency to be able to deliver projects. And we have engaged with that as an administration in relation, for example, to the Winter Garden scheme, which we are continuing and investing in. We think it's going to be a worthy scheme, but some of our colleagues have concerns about it, and just in around the edges about things like environmental or whatever. But what we've really focused on is actually we've recognised it's really difficult to get development going here, and having a good partner is really important. A councillor Mellor will know, having been a pool council councillor, that we have not been able to attract the kinds of developers that will build out substantial projects in pool, or even relatively small projects. It is really important to have a good partner and establish a relationship, and also give confidence to other developers in the market that they're not going to be messed around with by the council. I'd say in this Councillor Mellor's point about us taking the foot off the pedal, absolutely not the case. And if he'd read the risk register at F5, the new one that came out today, he will have seen that the development will be built out over the next 2 years as a mitigation factor. It's certainly our intention to go ahead and build this out as soon as possible. But there's no point in unnecessarily hamstringing an organisation, a company that is operating in the council's interest, and the flexibility is important.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. I have a few other colleagues wishing to come in. However, I would like to take the opportunity to address the point about political opportunism on this particular point. As Councillor Howell knows, I was the cabinet member in charge of redevelopment in the preceding council for Bournemouth Council, and I can tell you with every ounce of integrity I have that these are issues that were being discussed, explored, and almost exactly the same conversations were being had in the latter part of the then Bournemouth Council, and to suggest that this is a massive U-turn on behalf of a party for political opportunism case is completely 100% not the case. You can never predict what the future will come up with, but I can tell you with every ounce of certainty that had I been sat in your position, we would be having exactly the same discussions as we are having now, regardless of who was in administration now, because these are very real issues. Every development is different. Every development has to be looked at as its own merits, and people will have their own opinions on what should and shouldn't go ahead to achieve the best council taxpayers value for council taxpayers. I have Councillor Farquhar. No, I'm going to go to a few other people first. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm new to this world, as you all know. That doesn't mean that I'm not really experienced to what's going around us. What I found most interesting about the debate is the question mark of how many private developments and how much land banking there is across the BCP area, whereby private companies are looking to turn the best profit that they can. I mean, did we not just discuss, land banking in the form of Halls Bay? So it's a case of I'm not going to support this because essentially we've tried it the private developer way, and it's not worked out in BCP's best interests. So I find it strange that we set up a company called BDC to work in the best interests of the conurbation, and then we try to cut the ground from under them and go to a private company. So I won't be supporting the motion from Councillor Green.
Thank you. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I made my comments formally as a ward councillor, just to set out some background rather than to come down on one side or the other. And I wasn't going to speak again, but I'm afraid Councillor Howe's crocodile tears have brought me to do so. And I do find it slightly interesting that he talks about how hard it is to get development going in this area when we had a scheme very ready to go on Wessex Fields, with jobs to be created, with LEP funding in place, instead of which we've built the road to nowhere.
Thank you, Councillor Nicola Green. Councillor Mike Green, we have a proposal which has been duly seconded in front of us for consideration for a revised recommendation. I'm going to, if it's a very brief point, Councillor Howell, because you've had plenty of time this evening, but I'll give you
I
a
think
brief.
it's only fair to committee members that now that I should respond before they vote. I would have thought.
Well, you've been responding all the way through, but I'll give you another.
These are new points. These are new points.
Then be my guest, Councillor Howell.
The Wessex Fields point. I must actually come back with, because what we were left by the Bournemouth Council administration was not even enough money to build the road. And there wasn't any scheme ready to go. That's a complete fallacy. Not even enough money to build the roads. They're constantly complaining that we're not building. In terms of your point, Councillor Broadhead, it'd be very interesting to know, given that you went through all these things as a portfolio holder in Bournemouth Council, whether you received legal advice that said you could break the option agreement and allow private developers to develop the car parks in place of BDC.
Apologies, is that a direct question?
Yeah, that is a question to you. Yeah.
Sure. I'm quite happy to answer that because it was a decision that was never before us at the time. As you well know, the appeal had not concluded by the time that essentially we were in a decision making.
You just said you considered all these issues, and then
completely considered the issues that it was a response to the challenge of political opportunism. Was that this is a conversation which we're having, which had never happened before. I can assure you that it had happened previously. I'm now going to move to Councillor Mike Green to sum up his proposal. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Chairman. There's a couple of things that have come up during the debate that need to be responded to. When Councillor Mike Brooks spoke, I thought that he was going to be repeating what he did at the last meeting and attacking those who were trying to make political capital out of this, and particularly party political capital. So I wondered whether he was counting the number of times that Councillor Howell used the word conservative in derogatory fashion. I have, and I believe that all those who have spoken on the same side as I have on this debate, have not made any party political points. We are making the points because we believe that it is the right thing for the people of BCP and for the council taxpayer. It is wrong to say that BDC was set up just for to follow the intentions of Bournemouth Council. Had it purely been to do so, then it would not have launched the appeal. And as I said at the last overview and scrutiny meeting, I don't believe that friends and colleagues should be launching appeals against each other. But clearly they did it in the way that they wanted to do so. I don't understand where Councillor Mike Brooke was coming from, that there would be environmental costs as well as financial costs in the council not going ahead with BDC. And my question about the option agreement and recommendation C to the Cabinet was exactly about whether there was the opportunity to move outside the BDC framework to be able to do this, quite possibly, and Councillor Broadhead will know that we've discussed this in the past, in return for other items which do seem to be finding their way into BDC, although they were not in the option agreement. There may be arrangements that can be made for them. But I think fundamentally, the point that is being missed absolutely by Councillor Howell and Councillor Farquhar is around the opportunity for development. If the private developers have no wish to develop this site, they won't bid. The council has every opportunity as the owner of the site to say, this is what we require. These are the conditions. You must develop this within the time frame that is required. You must develop it absolutely within within the confines of this planning permission. However, in order to be sure that we are getting best value for the council taxpayer, that is the only way to do so. If we go ahead as the Cabinet as is being proposed to Cabinet at the moment, that guarantee will not be there, and I believe personally that we will be shortchanging the BCP council taxpayer, and that's why I'm moving it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. We've had a recommendation on this item made and duly seconded. I've had an information via the instant messenger that Councillor Trent has had to leave the meeting, so will not be able to vote. He says he would like to abstain on the proposal. He hasn't heard the entire debate, but I suppose an abstention is what it is anyway. So I will though now pass to Claire to take a roll call on the recommendation, and if we could ask all councillors that are in favour to say for, all councillors are against say against, and those to abstain to say abstain. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Broadhead.
For.
Councillor Haynes. For. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Anderson. I've just had a message from Councillor Anderson to say that he's lost connection. So if we progress with the voting and we can come back.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Brooke.
Against.
Councillor Earl.
Against.
Councillor Farquhar.
Abstain, and I'd like my vote recorded, please.
Councillor Fear.
For.
Councillor Mike Green.
For.
Councillor Nicola Green.
For.
Councillor Iyengar.
For.
Councillor Mellor.
For.
Councillor Miles. Sorry, Councillor Miles.
Against.
Councillor Rigby.
Against.
And Councillor Trent's not in the meeting.
Can we
Councillor
see
Anderson.
Councillor Anderson back on? Just have a quick look. It does appear to be he's back in. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. Would you like me to vote?
When did you drop out? Did you drop out once you'd heard all of the debate?
I dropped out as you were asking Claire to take the vote.
Okay, I think that's acceptable. In which case, could we ask whether you're for, against, or abstaining on the proposal?
This is the proposal put forward by Councillor Green. In
Correct.
which case, I am for it.
Thank you very much.
That's 9 in favour, 4 against, and 2 abstentions.
Thank you very much. In which case, that concludes item number 9. As with other recommendations that we made both in this meeting and in the earlier meeting today, I will take those on behalf of the Overview and Scrutiny Board to Cabinet a week Wednesday for their consideration. Colleagues, that takes us on to item 10, which is the forward plan. The forward plan has been put forward with all of the agenda item, with the formal agendas alongside the cabinet forward plan. Do I have any particular requests at this stage from board members of items either on the cabinet forward plan that they definitively wish us to consider, or indeed any further items not on the cabinet forward plan that they wish to put on our Overview and Scrutiny Board forward plan? Councillor Brooke.
Fine. Thank you, Chair. In Shadow Council Scrutiny, I raised an issue relating to Tricuro, and we said that it would go on to our forward plan when the full council came into existence. I raised it very early on in our Scrutiny Committee meetings, but it has never ever appeared. I was wondering whether we can go back through the records and ensure that it is added on at some point in the near future.
Thank you very much. I'll take that away with officers to figure out, in particular, whether that is an item which comes to our board or the health board. I think I recall your comments being that you wanted to look more at the business side of it rather than the service provision side of it, in which case it would land at this board. But I'll take that away and perhaps liaise with colleagues in the Health and Adult Social Care Committee as well. Would that be acceptable, Councillor Rook?
Yes, that would be fine. Your memory is correct. It is more to do with the financial side than the health side.
Thank you very much. One other point that I would wish to make: we are supposed to scrutinise crime and disorder, I think, issues at least once a year. Because of the COVID crisis, we have not been able to do that, but that is on the forward plan to be considered, I believe, at our next meeting. So unless there are any other, Councillor Farquhar wishes to raise a point. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you. Just request then, if we are required to look at crime and disorder, I'd certainly like the board to consider the disparity in the fact that the Police and Crime Commissioner reported that you're 25 times more likely to be stopped and searched because of the colour of your skin if you're black in Dorset than not. Now, I'd just like a better clarification whether or not that's something we can explore as a board here as part of the crime and disorder.
Councillor Parker, I'll seek advice, but I believe that the remit of our scrutiny function is essentially to look at the scrutiny of the crime scrutiny, if that makes sense, and how that's functioning, rather than to take over items which do happen elsewhere. But again, I'll take that away and look into what we can draw into that, because I think it's useful if we have to by statute consider that item anyway, that we make it as full an item and consider other aspects within there at the same time. So point taken. In which case, colleagues, unless I have any dissent, I will do what we normally do, which is liaise with the Vice Chair, look through items on the Cabinet Forward Plan that we would suggest are items that we wish to look at the next board meetings, and circulate that to board members for their comments before publication. So unless I have any other comments around that, I will work on that basis, in which case that will take me to item 11, which are future meeting dates, and the next scheduled meeting that we have is for the 20th of July, and I think we're working on the assumption again that we'll have our standard patter of a 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. meeting, unless we have any other change in the number of items that we have to consider, but that is the accepted process now. I haven't had any other messages from members of the board to say that they disagree with either the suggested way forward for the forward plan, or indeed any dissent from the future meeting dates, in which case thank you all, the board members, participants, cabinet members, officers. Thank you to members of the press and public that are joining us. I will take the recommendations forward to the next cabinet meeting, and I look forward to seeing you again at the next one. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.